Dixieland Collection is a laser-focused trad jazz ensemble centered around the idea of tapping into that early 1900s cradle of jazz sound from the likes of Louis Armstrong and his Hot Seven, or King Oliver and his Creole jazz band. That kind of very early birthplace of jazz sound. It's very specific, very nuanced, and this library is designed with all the instruments in mind to create that very specific sound quality in your writing, all the way down to the way these guys dealt with vibrato, almost a over-the-top extreme version of a kind of overtone heavy vibrato that kind of wiggled in and out of the note, something you couldn't really create with a digital kind of emulation of that sort of vibrato. We captured that live, and it's really the core element of this library. The players were instructed to really work within the confines of that era of playing their instruments, and it's been captured so beautifully here within the cornet, the clarinet, the trombone. Then as we head through into the banjo, which is a tenor banjo classic of that style, we get a series of live performed chord patterns to a series of tempos that will link directly and intuitively to your DAW or any tempo settings you have within your computer, and the strumming will be actually live of a player really doing it. It's not individual chords patched together, though you can build that if you want to as well. The recordings we have here are actual live performed 16-bar loops of chord strums on the individual chord types through a plethora of majors and minors and sevenths and dominants and diminished and ninth chords and sixth chords. Everything you really need to build the fundamental building blocks of this style of music. Then we head through into a beautiful sounding piano that's just designed to fit within that kind of world of early jazz. Upright bass with a plethora of articulations, again some really interesting nuanced textures, and then a drum kit that has all the kind of bells and whistles of some of the wood blocks and the cowbells and the tambourine, and just the textural qualities you've got in a drum kit in early jazz that lent heavily on percussive elements before the kind of kit was standardized into what we expect to see on this stage nowadays. Okay, so let's jump into the cornet. As you can see, the instrument is wrapped in our usual overlay threshold functionality, where we gain access to any and all articulations we want to on the fly, based on either your velocity input or any CC that you choose thereof, and a series of articulations that are really defined to tap into that overall sound of the instrument. We've already had a miniature performance of this, of course, and there's a series of demos where you can hear very, very specific switches between these sounds. So let's just jump into the key switching and go through these one at a time. So we've got the longs here. Again, all of this is designed to have that kind of Satchmo style, Louis Armstrong, King Oliver, wild vibrato sound. Marcato, which is a shorter note variation on a long note, still with that beautiful body and still with that intense vibrato. This to me is really the kind of phrase maker of these instruments. Beautiful. Staccato, very short and sharp. Very cool. Great for those little runs. Very cool. Double tongues. Very cool. Sorsato bends. I love these. These are just so full of character. Really great to throw in phrases. So of course, if you had this in overlaying mode, perhaps we had Marcato for the most part, and then we just stuck the Sforzato bends at the very top. Just really, really cool. Immediately creates this really expressive vibe to the overall sound. Flutter shorts. Again, really useful is just a quick inflection just to add some additional character, nuance and texture to your overall sound. Chromatic grace. Oh, I love these. The higher these get, the kind of more roaring and ripping they get. Again, if we had Mercatos on, overlay mode, and we just stuck a chromatic grace in the top. Very cool. Grace notes. These are adaptive to our scale link, so we can have all semitones, all whole tones, or any key signature you wish, as well as temporal overrides on key switches. And grace notes sound like this. Very beautiful, with a nice long ending with that natural vibrato coming into play as well. Turns, again, adaptive to the scale mode you're playing in. Muted openers, this is really cool and nuanced. This is kind of a long note that has just a muted start to it. Really classic of maybe like King Oliver as a textural foundation to his kind of soloing technique, something he really pioneered. Again, really beautiful just to put in as one individual kind of overlay threshold. So when you're playing, you can just dip into that if you want to. That's at the very end of one of the demos, I believe, as well. Erratic short trill shakes. These are really cool. It's really kind of crazy, cool little additional textures. Again, really great for throwing into the middle of a solo, perhaps. Falls. Beautiful. Okay, everything else on the interface is as you'd expect on a Insanity Samples library. We have the overlaying functionality where we can build our own overlays, or we have the performance modes, which are just kind of like two dedicated starting points for you that you can go on to edit yourself, and it'll always snap back to our factory versions when you want to click back onto those, or build your own entirely from the overlay functionality. Then we have our true legato section here with our adaptive speed and velo to go between fast and slow adaptive modes. If we just go into the longs here and I'll show you, if we're playing fast, we're just going to get the notes kind of moving on. But if I hold a note and then play another note after, set to the speed threshold here, so just under a second. We get that lovely ripping kind of legato that kind of throws you up to the notes. Really beautiful, really expressive, and a whole series of different functions here as well to lock that legato into the velocity that you're playing, which is very useful, as well as switching between adaptive velo or fixing it to fast or slow. Then we have our mixer window where we can turn up or down that legato transition, play around with our microphones. Remembering the era here, you really want to try to keep it as kind of mono and downstream as possible. They would quite often just have one microphone in the room, everyone surrounding it, and they're just kind of basing themselves further or closer to the microphone, depending on how loud or quiet they need to be within the tune. So think about that when you're using these. For instance, we've had a very sparse condenser and ribbon setup here. You could strip that all the way back to just the ribbon or just the condenser and go on and have a single mic setup as if it was really truly recorded in that era, or any blend you wish. We just kind of offer a series of textural tastes here. All of these microphones are in the same position on the cornet, so you kind of just have this as what do you like the sound of and how would you like this cornet to kind of push through the mix. Then we have the mechanical sounds, which is the physical sound of the key being pressed, a really core part of making these instruments sound realistic and human. And then an expressive control, which is basically just a global volume, effectively. Then we have our classic effects with stereo, delay and reverb, and a series of convolutions on offer. And then finally an EQ stage where you can blend in your own taste of EQ should you want to within the actual confines of the instrument, though of course most people probably use their own external one. As for EQ, there's a secondary dedicated EQ that creates a special vintage texture within the instrument itself. It's across the entire library. The effects are subtle on the instruments that are kind of higher. You hear it more in the bass because what's this doing is creating the kind of sound of a vinyl almost. It's kind of taking a huge high pass filter, cutting out a bunch of those lows up to about 150 hertz, and then it's also taking away quite a bit of the highs, and then also just a little playing around in the mid-range as well, just to boost certain frequencies and cut certain others. So with this off, let's go to Mikado. Again, you won't hear it too much on the cornet, but it's just the overall picture when they're all playing together, you really hear it. So here's without. And with. You can hear it just becomes more boxy, less bassy, and just more classic of that kind of specific idiom. And you can hear more kind of vinyl-esque kind of qualities to the overall sound of the instrument. Okay, let's move on to clarinet. Clarinet is a real beauty within this library. There's so much on offer from a textural perspective. It's super playable and really fun to mess around with. We've already heard it, of course, within the performance mode idiom. So let's jump into the key switches. Here's longs. And again, we have that beautiful start note that's followed by a quite intense vibrato. Really encapsulating how live players work. There's never going to be this kind of immediate vibrato up front. It's always going to build up as you hold a note longer. The vibrato is going to develop over time. That's just how real players play, and that's what we've captured here. Really lovely Mikatos. Again, for me, this really is the bread and butter of these instruments, because it's kind of how a player plays when they're doing phrasing, you know, that kind of like bopping, kind of aggressive start to the note, a little punch to it, but then immediately kind of dying off into this soft vib. Really lovely staccato. Lovely double tongues. Lovely sforzato shorts. Lovely chromatic grace. Oof, I love those. Let's do that thing. Let's put Mikado on, go into overlaying, chuck chromatic grace at the top. Just so immediately expressive. It really just feels like you have the instrument in your hand. Okay, on to grace notes. Again, fully adaptive to the scale mode. Beautiful turns. Extreme gliss. This is a bit of an experimental one. This is kind of born from the idea of that kind of special gliss you can do on a clarinet, where you just kind of lift the keys and arrive at the note. It's really extreme. You get all sorts of crazy pitch kind of variation and modulation. Really cool for kind of injecting into maybe the beginning of a solo to really punch that first note through. I think we do that on one of the demos. The opening kind of note of the solo is just this ripping. You can really hear that. It just sounds, again, something you can't recreate in the box. You could do that with pitch modulation, but it isn't going to give you the same timbre as the actual instrument being played like that. Just beautiful. Trills. Lovely. Falls. Awesome. Everything else in the interface is pretty much the same as the trumpets, with everything you'd expect from an Ensemble samples library. Again, the vintage EQ here. Now with it on. just immediately creating that kind of old vintage vinyl type quality. All right, on to the trombone then. Again, as you can see, a plethora of articulations on offer here. Let's get to the key switching. With that really beautiful, iconic performance vibrato there, and the maccatos. It's so full of character, again, and nuance. When these things go into a piece, when you're writing a demo, it just effortlessly becomes humanized by the way these things have been performed. Onto staccato. Beautiful. Double tongues. Lovely. Bends, short. Lovely. Bends, long. Lovely. Tongued grace. These are grace notes kind of moving up by semitone or whole tone, fully adaptive to the scale mode, to the triggered pitch. And with tongued, you kind of hear that note jump up, whereas the slide version is, of course, as it sounds, the slide equivalent. And then the slide grace. Lovely. Turns. Flutter rips. They're great. Short shakes. So cool. And falls. Awesome. So the interface is, of course, functioning the same as all of the other instruments within the collection. So let's jump on to the banjo, because there is a lot to discuss here. So as we look at the interface here, it's a bit of a different layout because it's just a totally different beast. We've broken this instrument out into a series of different kind of playing styles. So we have individual notes for you to play melodies and solos. And they sound really very beautiful. And something that's special about this as well, if we can just jump over to the mixer quick, is we've done our spectral editing with the banjo. So we've allowed for the instrument to be sampled in total isolation without any of the body resonance. For a very dry sound. And then the body resonance itself, we turn this right up, you'll hear it. Because that particular thing doesn't warrant any pitch variation. So sampling that into the baked sample itself would kind of cause a bit of an uncanny valley. It's something we did in the hang really successfully, and we've brought it through to the banjo here. So you can dial in to taste how much of that body resonance you get. None at all, or a good amount of it. Which of course is how an actual banjo sounds when you play one. That's the individual notes, and the overlay threshold functionality specifically links to those individual notes. So we have the longs, we have the slides, and if we change that to falls quick, we have some falls as well. Really cool. Nice way to create kind of phrasing. Very cool. But the real body of this instrument, and the thing that really sets this apart, is the chord engine. So we have individually strummed chords, which are velocity sensitive as well. We have 3 octaves of these. The first C octave are short chord variations. Play soft and you'll get the kind of top half of the chord. Play hard and you'll get the full 4-string strum, just like you would on a real player, kind of having low, high kind of strumming techniques. So we go from shorts in the first octave to longs in the second octave. Beautiful. But then we have actual performed loops, which are synced to your tempo by default. They've been recorded at a series of different tempos, and these are live performances. They haven't been stitched together from individual chord strums like you would often find in these sorts of libraries. This is actually live performed, so it fits in with your actual music and just sounds like a real player sitting there in the background just holding down the rhythm. Awesome, so cool. And this is functioning in a way where we can either link it to specific scales from our scale link mode, so C majors through to anything you want really. Then the alternate version of that is where the 1, 4, 5 chords are all dominant, which is obviously very classic in this style of music, including going into kind of like blues and any sort of rhythm at all. They're all basically dominant led. Then we can go through and we can change any individual chord we want to any chord quality that we have on offer, from major and minor triads to major 7s, minor 7s, dominant 7s, diminished 7s, major 6, minor 6, and dominant 9. They're all on offer and they've all been live sampled, both as single strums, long and short, soft and loud, and then all the way through to actual chord patterns that have been recorded at multiple tempos to sync into any piece of music that you care to write at any speed. So we can go through and we can manually adjust those. Then we have temporal key switching. So say we are dealing with some modulation. You want that C major to turn into a C dominant 7 to bring you to an F major comfortably. So let's say we've chosen C major as our scale, and we can see here now the C major is just a major triad. And there's the loop. If we want that to turn into a C dominant 7, but we only want to briefly do that, and then that's going to drag us to the F major, we can set a temporal override for the dominant 7. This is currently set to B -1. When I press that key switch, you can see all chords change to dominant 7 in one hit. So we go from this kind of scale specific link of a series of different chords to everything becoming dominant 7, which means when I play the C now, I'm getting the dominant 7. So now I'm going to go C major triad, C dominant 7 triad, F major 7 triad from the original key, and then I'll hit dominant and I'll go F dominant again. Here we go. It's just so versatile and so user friendly. We can obviously draw in any of these key switches if we want to, or like I'm doing here, we can actually play them on the fly. It's entirely up to you. Incredibly expressive. I think it might just be one of the most in-depth strum sampled banjo you might find out there, with all of those chord variations, things that are actually performed live by a real musician, syncing to your tunes effortlessly with no requirement for you to do anything in terms of tempo. Okay, let's jump onto the piano. So just a simple, subtle, beautiful piano that's just designed to sit under the mix on one of these tunes. We kind of holds its own as well in a kind of more New Orleans, as you would have heard in the intro. It's very cool, very beautiful little piano, very simple. We've got 2 microphones on this. Again, we're trying to really tap into that idiom. We're keeping things as simple as possible, and we're trying to keep things as mono as possible on purpose. You can go in and do any of your panning and mixing and anything you like there, but to keep true to the style and to have it just effortlessly sounding like a Dixie piece of music, you're probably going to keep the mics to an absolute minimum, and you're probably going to want to keep them all in the center to really tap into that mono sound. This is a really good example for the vintage EQ as well, because you go from this kind of wide sound to this. boxy and vinyl kind of sounding. Super, super cool, and just effortlessly gets you into that vibe and vein yet again. All right, the upright bass. A plethora of articulations on offer here. This is a super, super cool instrument. It's actually one of the favourite double basses that I think we've ever recorded. It sounds so warm and lush and round and just lovely. I love it so much. Let's go through key switching. So you got the longs. Then you've got the Mikatos, which is just a little bit shorter. With an actual hand stop on the note. Then staccatos. I love those. They're kind of the bread and butter of the double bass, really, I think. Hammer-ons. Beautiful. Another one of those textures that's incredibly useful if you put maybe Mikatos in the main bulk and then hammer-ons at the top. Very, very cool sound. Pull-offs. And that's specific to the target note you're aiming for. Slurs. Another beautiful one that I think you heard a little bit of earlier there, where you can have the Mikatos or staccatos in the bulk of the overlay threshold and then just a little slide at the top. Super cool. Slides down. This is to the target pitch, by the way, so really useful. Again, Mikatos, and I'll put slides down in the top. Very, very cool. Onto the trem gliss up. These are quite experimental. So the important thing here to know is that it goes from the target pitch you're playing, but then it just goes and goes and goes. Really cool for that kind of like solo moment where you're just playing up and up and up. And then the same thing in reverse. Very cool. Then we have an extreme gliss. There's up and down variations here and fast and slow. The little circle is slow. If we play soft, we'll get slow. If we play hard, we'll get fast. But we can turn any of those off. So if we had just slow, no matter how hard or soft we play. I love all the additional sound you can hear in this. It just makes it so live and real. And then we have a down version. Awesome. An additional thing to mention here is the open strings functionality. So if we was to play, of course an E is always open, then an A, D, G. If you don't have this on, then they are fingered versions of those notes. So they sound slightly duller, slightly less kind of bright and slightly less open. Now with the open strings on, we get the actual open string sound. Or sometimes you're not playing like that in jazz. You kind of need fingered versions of those notes. So it's there, it's accessible, and it's linked to a variable key switch of your choice so that you can turn this off and on the fly to access open strings or closed strings, entirely up to you. Same sort of interface as the rest of the instruments, of course. So let's move on to the final addition, which is drums. The most important thing about the drums here is that we have some really cool textures on offer. So we have the basic kit with snare, both snare on and off. And then 2 octaves above that, you have a right hand. For you to be able to do kind of finger drumming and create rolls and more intricate playing. Then we have some brush sounds, which is again off snare and on snare. Rim clicks. We have a soft and hard beater on the kick. And I should mention that the skin on the snare is actually a hide snare, so that you get that kind of more old school sound, not so much transients on the top end. Hi-hats are standard, but we do have a kind of clap sound as well with the foot pedal, which is a really interesting texture. Then we have some percussive textures as well. We have blocks, cowbell, tambourine. Very cool. Then we have a couple of chinas on offer, both played and choked, which is really cool. And then we have our ride. With that bell hit kind of at the very top of the dynamic range, and also choked versions. Very cool. Some toms. And that kind of comprises our overall kind of jazz drum kit. It's a kind of stripped down bare bones kit like you would have in real life, but with all of those percussive textures as well, which is very, very cool. If we look at the main interface, you'll see here as well, there's some variations in the way it looks. We have every variation of drum on offer, all with their own mix signals for the microphones. Again, less is more here to create that Dixie sound, but we do also have some really cool things like the low broadcaster picking up the kick drum, though it is also quite interesting on all of the other instruments, because of course you would have bleed on these microphones. So I personally think that the best thing to do is to leave it on just a couple of these mics, something high, something low, keep it mono, keep it simple. That's the best way to keep it sounding kind of Dixie and traditional, and then just blend in a texture of whether or not you want the high mic coming in stronger because the thing is closer to the high mic, or you want the low mic coming in stronger because the thing is closer to the low mic. That's kind of the best way to deal with it, I think. You can see there's an indicator here as well, just tells you what you're playing, just in case you get confused, and you can play a note and you'll see exactly what's being played. And then the standard effects and EQ chain as well. Again, we have the vintage button here. If we jump over to the bass, we can really see what that sounds like in use on a bass instrument. Now with it on, a really, really extreme difference, and put all those things together. So basically write a piece of music and then just pop all the vintage EQ buttons on all of the instruments, and you won't have to do any of that kind of post EQing yourself if you don't want to. Those low and high pass filters, as well as some kind of like dips and troughs in the EQ, will be done for you, and it will kind of give that immediate sound of the vibe. Okay, that has been the Dixieland Collection, a collection of instruments that are designed to tap very specifically with a laser focus into the original birth of jazz itself, with people like Louis Armstrong and King Oliver leading the forefront at the time. This library is designed to have all the instruments all together in one place to give that sound to you in one hit, without needing to go anywhere else and without really needing to leave the box at all, to create a piece of music that just encapsulates the Dixie style. Head to insanitysamples.com for more information, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.